2020 presidential election has led to the largest criminal investigation in American history. Scott MacFarlane has more on where things stand. Hey, Scott.
And Marie, as of now, nearly 1,200 people have been charged for their roles in January 6th, and more than half have either pleaded guilty or been convicted at trial. But for the officers who protected the Capitol that day and their families, the pain is still raw.
As he arrived at work 3 years ago, Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick's family says he had a bad feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
He was nervous.
I don't think he knew what was coming, but he knew something was coming.
Shortly after, a mob surrounded the U.S. Capitol. Some smashing windows, entering the Senate chamber, and assaulting officers. Sicknick tried to stop a crowd from pushing forward outside.
They went through hell.
Sicknick died the next day of multiple strokes. His family says the attack he and other officers suffered contributed to his death. 2 men pleaded guilty in connection with the assault on Sicknick. One received an almost 7-year sentence. They're just 2 of the nearly 1,200 defendants in the largest federal criminal prosecution in U.S. history, with defendants from nearly all 50 states, including military veterans, members of far-right groups, even grandmothers, police officers, and firefighters.
3 years ago, if I told you there'd be 1,200 defendants and more to come, would that have surprised you?
I would have been shocked.
Scott Frederickson is a former Justice Department prosecutor.
To find those people responsible, track them down, identify them, is a gargantuan job.
Some of the defendants have argued they were acting on the directions of then-President Donald Trump.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
But their arguments have failed. 100% of the January 6 defendants to go on trial by jury have been at least partially convicted.
This is probably the most heavily video documented case that I've ever seen.
Everybody had a phone.
Exactly. You've got social media of people before saying what they're going to do, and then you've got video of them doing it, and then them bragging about it afterwards. That's not a scenario that is really winnable in any situation.
Defense attorney David Benowitz has handled about a dozen January 6 cases and says the punishment is real for those who've lost jobs, friendships, and reputations.
I would hope that no one who's gone through this here would ever think about engaging in this again.
With Trump running to return to the White House, he continues to falsely say there was election fraud, a claim echoed by the rioters, and he promised to pardon them if he wins a second term.
I don't call them prisoners, I call them hostages. They're hostages.
Again, riling the tensions and reopening wounds 3 years later.
Excuse my language, I think it's a bunch of bullshit. They broke the law. They broke several laws. They're on camera doing it. They were convicted in a court and sitting in jail because of it.
Anne-Marie, I've been in court for hundreds of hearings over the past few years and seen a range of emotions from the defendants, from tears to denial to defiance to anger. Already the biggest prosecution in U.S. history. There are many more arrests still to come.
Really? And we know the former president is also perhaps one of those in the crosshairs of this investigation. What's going on next with this federal investigation?
Well, let's start with former President Trump. His trial date is still on the calendar for March 4th. It could get delayed with the appeals in the case, but for now, it is 2 months away. And he faces one of the same charges hundreds of the January 6 defendants face: obstruction of an official proceeding. That charge is being reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court. But as of now, Donald Trump set for trial in a little less than 2 months.
You know, if there's one thing that the attack on the Capitol has done for this country is we are talking an awful lot about democracy, what it means to us, whether or not our institutions can and will hold in the future. And now we have a former Capitol police officer who has announced his campaign for Congress today. Tell us about that.
His name is Harry Dunn. His name and his face may be familiar because he testified publicly at the nationally covered January 6 Select Committee public hearings in 2022. Harry Dunn stepped down from the force a couple weeks ago, now running for the Democratic nomination in Maryland's 3rd congressional district. That ad you're seeing, just released by Dunn this morning, shows him making an argument in which he says Members of Congress stood behind him as he protected the Capitol that day, but then some of them chose to stand behind Trump after, making a rather piercing argument about the importance of democracy and clearly running for the Democratic nomination in that district.
Right, indeed. Scott, thank you very much.